Welcome everybody to our session today on Auditing Essentials, Building an Organization's Sustainable Future Through Accountability. I didn't pick the title, but we're going to get into all the pieces of that. So welcome here. I got a few questions for you to make this a little interactive to start with. So by a show of hands, how many people here are certified as an environment, health, safety, or other operational type of auditor? How many people certified auditors here? Half a dozen, thereabouts? Okay. How many people have done an audit, but they're not necessarily certified, but have been on an audit team? Okay, there's another maybe 8, 10 people there. How many people have been on the other side of the audit team, have been an auditee, have been audited in something that they do? And there's quite a few people there, so you know a little bit about auditing from that side of things, and you've seen that. And finally, one last question. How many people here work for an organization that has an environment, health, safety audit program? Yeah, maybe about a third of the room there. How many people don't know if you have a program? So there's a variety of knowledge in the room about environment, health, safety auditing. So what we're going to try to do today is to tell you a little bit about what an EHS audit is, how it's done, how auditors do get to be certified, and then discuss a little bit about how that applies to a sustainable future, whatever that means, and accountability for an organization. And to do that today, we've got 3 auditors. We have, my name is Evan Baker, and we have Jag Bilkhu and Michael Herald. And I'll get to introducing them and tell you a little bit more about them in a little bit. The process we're going to go through today, I'll try to set the stage a little bit with a few comments about auditing and sustainability and accountability. Then Jag and Michael each have a short presentation that they're going to be going through. I'll put some questions that I have to Jag and Michael for discussion and debate. And then we're going to open it up to you folks on the floor for a bit of question and answer session as well, and get a chance to share some of that variety of knowledge that's in the room here. So before we get into auditing, let's talk a little bit about sustainability and accountability. 6 syllables each. Sustainability, accountability, big words, what do they mean? Sustainability, a lot of people tend to associate sustainability these days with sustainable disclosures, ESG, environment, social governance, disclosures and reporting that companies do. And so that's the focus of a lot of sustainability, and there's many environmental factors and social factors come into that. Environmental factors such as climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, social factors such as safety culture, and governance, the G, the governance. Audits are a really important part of governance in an organization. It's a mechanism whereby those who are in charge of the organization get to know and understand a little bit more about what's going on in the organization through independent eyes that are brought from an auditor, whether it's an internal auditor or somebody from outside the organization. ESG, there's quite a few things that are pretty interesting about ESG. I've got a few articles here. This one here, let's see. France introduces possible jail time as penalty for non-compliance with sustainability disclosure. In other words, if you don't disclose something and disclose it properly, and how do you know if you're disclosing it properly if you don't have it audited and verified, then there's possible jail time. That'll get the attention of boards of directors. Top 10 international sustainability standards. There's all sorts of them now around sustainability, and a lot of debate about which ones to use, and there's an evolution going on there. and sustainability reporting guidance for the oil and gas industry, which happens to be the industry that I do most of my work in. So when it comes to sustainability, there's a lot of different perspectives. But that aspect of sustainability isn't necessarily, it's one part of environmental auditing, but it's not necessarily everything. If we talk about the sustainable future of an organization, what is the accountability that helps to make an organization sustainable? How do they know what's going on in the organization? And this is a lot of where auditing comes in as well. Some of you might have heard a bit about auditing in the news lately. Just last week, there was a news, if you're from Alberta, and I know a lot of people are not, but there was an interesting news article came out last week. The following statement was issued by Auditor General Doug Wiley on February 6th. I recently commenced an examination of the procurement and contracting processes at the Department of Health and Alberta Health Services. At this time, the examination pertains to chartered surgical facilities, medication, being ibuprofen or acetaminophen, and COVID-19 personal protection equipment and the acquisition of those. And those of you who are in Alberta might have heard in the news that our Premier is taking a little bit of heat over that one. So this is a way that in the government context, auditing, and this isn't quite the same type of auditing we're talking about today, but auditing can certainly bring to light some things that are very topical and the public wants to know about, the public needs to know about. So that's a couple of perspectives on auditing. And then accountability, when we're talking about accountability and auditing, consider it to be on different levels for an organization. There's a corporate level. What's the corporate accountability? There's your department that you work for. What's your departmental accountability for what is going on, and how do you know if you're doing things the way you're supposed to be doing it? And then there's your personal accountability, and that may come up in an audit as well. But mostly it tends to be a focus on systems and whether the systems are working rather than the individual's particular role in those systems. Okay, so that's a bit of an introduction. I think I forgot to introduce myself very well. My name is Evan Baker. I work for a small consultancy called Span Consulting, and our focus is on auditing and on management systems. I've been a certified auditor since 2003, although I started my auditing probably about 14 years before that with a company called Nova here in Calgary. So I focus on auditing management systems, largely in oil and gas, but also pipelines, rail, petrochemicals, pulp and paper, number of different types of industries, both here in Alberta and in various places in Canada, the US, and I've also done some auditing in Europe. So auditing can open up some interesting opportunities to take you abroad as well. So that's a bit about me. Let me kick it over now to our two speakers. I'll introduce both of them here. The first speaker is going to be Jag Bilkhu. So Jag is a Senior Project Manager of Environmental Stewardship and Sustainability for Atkins Realis. He has more than 25 years of experience in environmental and safety auditing. He's also provided numerous training courses in EMS development and auditing over the last 20 years. He's certified both as a Certified Environmental Auditor, which is the EPCEA designation, and Environmental Management Systems Lead Auditor, which is ESMLA. So a couple of different certifications as auditors that you can get here with EcoCanada. And his experience includes working on projects throughout Canada and internationally in countries throughout Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, and in the Caribbean as well. So welcome, Jag. And then Michael Herald. is a CRSP, Canadian Registered Safety Professional, as well as being an EPCA and EPEMSLA. And he's worked as an environmental health and safety consultant for over 34 years. So there's a bit of a theme here, 34 years, 30 years, 30 years. We need more blood, more new blood in the auditing profession. And I hope this gets some of you interested in it because it can open up a world of opportunities. Michael has led and participated in literally hundreds of environment, health, and safety audits and management system assessments worldwide, working in manufacturing, port and airport authorities, marine terminals, mining, oil and gas, utility, chemical, lumber, pulp and paper, educational, real estate, and federal government agencies. Is there anything you don't audit, Michael? He's also a core auditor, a certificate of recognition auditor for 2 groups in BC, as well as for the Green Marine Environmental Certification Program. And he's currently helping Metro Vancouver Water Services. Both our speakers here today are from the West Coast. So with that, I think, Jag, I will turn it over to you.
No worries. Thank you, Evan. As Evan mentioned, I work with a company called Atkins Realis, formerly known as SNC-Lavalin. You may have heard of us. 40,000 employees worldwide, 8,000 in Canada, several thousand here in Western Canada. And we do everything from, we're a full-service environmental engineering services firm. Everything from right from the very beginning in the planning process, permitting, into operations, maintenance, construction, all the way into decommissioning. The important thing that I want to mention around this is that that you can do an audit throughout the project lifecycle. It's not uncommon to do an audit in the planning phase. It's not uncommon to do an audit even in the decommissioning phase. Most common, we do audits in the operations and maintenance phase, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So before I start, I really want to, talk about what is an audit, and so we're all speaking from the same song sheet. So there's the definition for an audit. It's a big mouthful. I'm not going to repeat it, but it's all up there. And it's based from ISO 19011, which is the international standard for management systems, auditing management systems. But the important thing, if you break down the definition, is that it has to be systematic. So it has to follow a structured process. It is independent. So when you do an audit, auditors should remain impartial, free from any conflicts of interest. It is documented. So the audit process relies on verifiable facts. They should be recorded. It should be objective evidence. So again, relying on those verifiable facts rather than looking at assumptions or opinions. And you're determining the extent to which an audit criteria are fulfilled. So the ultimate goal is to compare your findings against predefined audit criteria, whether that's a policy, whether it's a procedure, whether it's a regulation. And it's really important to say that an audit is more, sometimes people talk about inspections and they kind of equate the two together. An audit is more than just an inspection. It is a systematic and independent evaluation to ensure compliance and improvement. And it's because it's systematic and independent that makes it different than just being a basic inspection. Now, when we talk about audits, as Evan mentioned, there's several different types of audits. You started talking about financial audits, you talk about government audits. When we're talking about audits from an environmental perspective, we tend to talk about audits sort of in 2 ways. We talk about audits about, first of all, how an audit is being done and basically who the proponent is, or we can talk about the scope of the audit. So let's talk first about the proponent of the audit. It can be and this is who is actually doing the audit. It can be either what we call a first, a second, or a third-party audit. A first-party audit is an organization that audits itself. I see a colleague of mine from BC Hydro. BC Hydro has a program where they do internal audits or environmental compliance evaluations. So that's an example of an internal process, a first-party audit. A second-party audit is where you would audit somebody externally external to you. Usually it's somebody you have some type of contractual relationship with, such as a supplier. Again, I'll give it an example of BC Hydro. BC Hydro sends waste to landfills. Some of those landfills may be on Indigenous land or on land that's federal, not permitted through a provincial process. So they've often asked an auditor to come in to do an audit of the landfill. And then finally, there's third-party audits. This is where another organization audits you. And typically, we see this with ISO registration or the certificate of recognition. So that's been examples of the first, second, and third-party audits. Again, we can look and define audits by the scope of the audit, so what is actually being audited. If you're looking at, oftentimes we'll look at just procedures, we'll look at policies. That's what we would typically call a management system audit, as I've mentioned. A lot of organizations are really concerned about compliance. They're looking to make sure they are following laws and regulations, federal, provincial, bylaws, permits, and so that would be an example of a compliance audit. And then finally, the other type of audit that's very common in our field is doing a due diligence audit, and this is looking at future risks and future liabilities. So if we look at the basic steps of an audit, they're structured in sort of three components. I'll talk about these three different components. These different steps are outlined in the ISO 19011 standard for management systems auditing. It's also highlighted in the CSA standard 7773, which is the standard for environmental compliance auditing. But essentially, we're looking at three different phases: the pre-audit stage, the on-site activities, and the post-audit activities. Okay, so if you look at the pre-audit activities, these are all the activities that happen before an audit takes place. So this is understanding your logistics. The most important thing of this is understanding your scope. What are we auditing? Is it a first-party audit? Is it a second-party audit? Is it a compliance audit? Is it a management system audit? So what's the scope? What are we looking at? Who's going to be on the audit team? What type of skill sets do they have? And part of this process may even involve getting some preliminary documentation. So sending a request out to the auditee saying, we need to understand your facility better. Send us your documents, send us your manuals, send us your records. The picture I have here, you can see in the top right-hand corner, that's a very young, much younger Michael and Jag. And we were on our way to Northern Macedonia to conduct an audit. And the picture here in the bottom left is a thermal facility for an electrical utility. And so one of the facilities that Michael and I were auditing. And you can imagine the logistics of doing an audit in a foreign country. So we had language issues to deal with. We had to get translators. We had, it was an audit for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So they wanted to make sure that they were following all the procedures, policies, and there was no risks for the investors. So they wanted to make sure, so we had to audit a number of facilities. We had 4 audit teams. They wanted everything done by January, gave us the contract in December, so we had our Christmas holidays to deal with, Orthodox Christmas to deal with. We had different work hours. We're used to kind of more of a 9 to 5 schedule. They worked more of a 7 to 2:30 schedule. So you can imagine, anyway, again, all the logistics of trying to conduct an audit such as that. So these are all important types of considerations when you're planning an audit. Once you get onto site and you do the audit, there's a number of other considerations and steps you want to go through. The most important thing, first of all, is doing your opening meeting. So this is where you go, sit down with your auditee, and you tell them what the purpose of your audit is, why you've come. You want to alleviate people's fears in this stage. You want to make sure that you're telling them you're not auditing them, you're not auditing people's individual behavior, you're auditing the organization. And you're there to help. 4 different things you really want to do. You want to look and do some interviews, you want to talk to people, you want to look at documents and records again, you want to be collecting samples, so you want to look at more than just one record, you want to look at several, so you have a good representative sample of any type of findings you might have, and you want to get out on site and do some observations. And then finally, before you leave the site, you want to do a bit of a closing meeting, a bit of a debrief, so you can tell the people who you've been auditing is there any follow-up that you need to do? And second of all, to give them a bit of a heads up as to what kind of issues you're finding. And at that point, they may be able to correct you and let you know if there's any errors or omissions. If you look at the picture I've got here in the top right-hand corner, that's a picture of myself in Russia back in around 2005 or 6. And you can't tell, but there's some Cyrillic writing on the wall. But we asked them, so tell us about your emergency response. They said, okay, well, we'll show you. And so that was the center where they managed the emergency response. The picture here on the bottom left is myself in the Middle East. And it was a seismic audit that I was doing for a 3D company in the Middle East. And so I'm out there in the desert. And then finally, once you've gone through the process and you've collected your evidence, you'll go back, you'll leave the site. Sometimes you don't have all the information you need. You may need to do a bit of a follow-up. You may request more information. You'll produce a draft report. The draft report is an excellent example or excellent way of actually, at least writing your findings out, but also it's an opportunity to look for any errors or omissions, because when you send it out, you may realize, or you may find out from the auditee, oh no, that's not the case. You said that waste isn't being tracked. Did you look at our waste tracking system? Whatever, right? So it's a good opportunity just to catch those errors before you actually finalize the report. And again, if you look at and the other thing is, then there's corrective actions that you may write into your audit report. And you may need to follow up on those corrective actions as well. If you look at these pictures, these are both kind of interesting examples just around follow-up. So the one in the bottom left is me at Site C. So for those of you who are not from British Columbia or aren't familiar with it, BC Hydro has just built a dam. It's probably the last big dam that's going to be built probably in Western Canada of that size, very massive. And the logistics, again, were very difficult to get up there to do the site visit. I was up there for 2 days. Got up there. As part of the whole process, there was a lot of follow-up that was required afterwards. In fact, we didn't write the audit report till probably 2 or 3 months later because of all the requests to get information. The picture in the top right is my colleague Karen and myself from Atkins, and we were out at a Navy shipyard, and again, we had done the audit, and this was us doing the follow-up audit a couple years later to see if they had actually implemented the corrective actions that we had suggested. So just what I'd like to talk about just very quickly is some pitfalls to avoid when you're doing an audit. There's a lot here. I'm not going to go through them all. But the one that's, to me, that really is the most important one is around materiality or risk assessment. It's very easy when you go onto an audit site, you start talking to people, you easily can start going down a rabbit hole if you start talking to somebody. You start talking to, let's say, a maintenance worker. He has his own pet peeves, or she has their pet peeves. They start talking about some issue, and you're like, oh, well, tell me more. Tell me more about this. And they start showing you records, and they start pulling out emails, and it really has nothing to do with the audit or the scope of the work you're looking at. So again, you have to extricate yourself from that. Realize that it may be an issue, but it's probably not the issue that you need to be going down and examining. The other thing I just want to talk about is the failure to communicate with key stakeholders. So again, when you do leave a site, you want to make sure that you communicate in such a way that you're always welcome to come back to site. If you don't do that, you're probably not going to be very successful in getting repeat work from that auditee, but you're also you're doing a disservice to the entire audit process, because they'll have their backs to the wall, they may not recognize why you were there, and they may not want you ever to come back and to do another audit again. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Michael.
Thank you. Here we go. Thanks, Jack, for that interesting presentation about the audit process, what is not an audit, what's included in an audit, what are some of the things you have to avoid when you're doing an audit. My name is Michael Herald. I am currently the president of the Auditing Association of Canada, And as Evan said, I have about 34 years of audit experience. Not working for a 40,000 person firm. I work for my own company called Blackbird EHS Consulting Services in North Vancouver. It's a one-man show, but I do hire subcontractors to help me on large audits. So rather than talk about the audit process, I was asked to talk a little bit about the auditor, what it takes to be an auditor, what are some of the organizations that certify auditors, what are some of the benefits and opportunities for the auditor itself, himself, herself, themselves. So initially, the question is, who is an auditor? Well, if you look at the ISO definition, it basically says it's someone who conducts the audit. That's pretty simple. I probably could have written that. But I think a better definition is looking back at what actually is an audit. So based on what the definition of an audit is, the auditor has to be someone who has knowledge of the audit topic, who can be unbiased in collecting audit evidence through a documented process that includes both observations, interviews, and document review to determine what the extent of the audit criteria, if it was fulfilled or not. So let's look at that in a little more detail. First, do you have knowledge of the audit topic? So is this an environmental audit? Is this a health and safety audit? Are you looking at hazardous waste? Are you looking at confined spaces? Do you know about these things? So you can't really audit something you have no knowledge of. So you need to have some knowledge of the audit topic ahead of time. You have to be unbiased in collecting audit evidence. So oftentimes in audits that I do, you're not allowed to audit your own work. So if you've developed a process or a procedure at an organization, you're not going back and auditing the process that you developed. So you have to be unbiased. And the documented process, typically, as Jag said, the 3 steps is the pre-audit, the on-site audit, and the reporting. And you document all your audit evidence while you're at the audit. You're collecting evidence through 3 means, again, observations, records review, and interviews. Typically, as an auditor, you wouldn't rely on one source of evidence to come to a conclusion. You'd want to verify it. Someone tells you something, you want to go and look at a document to prove that that actually happened. To just determine the extent of whether the audit criteria was fulfilled. So typically, when I'm doing an audit, or when we're doing an audit, we use an audit checklist or a protocol to guide us through the audit so that we know when we're done that we've fulfilled the scope of the work. Typically on an audit, there would be a lead auditor if it's a large audit. So I've been on audit teams of 8 people or so, sort of led by the main lead auditor who has a bit of knowledge about all the topics on the audit. He may not know everything about all the topics, but he has some knowledge of the topics that are included in the scope. And he also guides the audit team members. And as Jag said, typically those people are experts in a particular field. So if someone is a wastewater engineer, maybe that's the guy who's going to be doing the audit of the wastewater side of the program. You can also bring in subject matter experts if you need to, but typically the audit team will have enough expertise to be able to complete the audit themselves, and the lead auditor is sort of responsible for making sure the audit team has that expertise. So what gets audited? Well, typically, as Jag said, that's determined by the client, the scope of work, and they determine that by more or less a risk-based approach that I've seen. So for example, the Vancouver Airport has been conducting environmental audits of their tenants. They have about 65 tenants for the last 15 to 20 years. They can't audit every tenant every year, so they've gone through a risk-based approach, looked at some of the higher risk tenants, so the people who are handling fuel, people who are like the airlines, the car rental companies, the aircraft maintenance organizations, people who have higher risks that can contaminate the airport property. They are more frequently audited than some of the less risk people. So who accredits auditors? What is a recognized professional association? So if you want to be a accredited auditor, you're probably going to hook up with some sort of association that is certifying auditors. And you're not just getting your accreditation from somebody who opened up a hot dog stand on the corner. So you want to look to see that this organization has a president, a board of directors. They have subcommittees and committees that deal with the various topics that their profession is engaged in. There will be an examination process for the auditor after a review that they're qualified to take the exam. Once they pass the exam, that's not the end of the road. That's sort of the beginning. You need to keep professional development activities up, and your certificates typically expire. So the audit certificates can be somewhere from 2 years. So as a Green Marine verifier, my verification expires every 2 years. I have to get recertified, but my EMSLA and my CEA designations expire every 5 years. Organizations that certify individuals can follow an ISO standard, 17024. This is a voluntary standard. It is not mandatory, but typically if you are looking to be a certified auditor, you want to verify that the organization has at least self-declared or has been accredited under ISO 17024. So what are your options in Canada? Well, here at ECHO, they offer the Compliance Environmental Auditor Designation, the CEA, and the EMSLA, the Environmental Management System Lead Auditor Designation. They're two different things. One is based on a regulatory approach to auditing, so you're looking at compliance to laws and regulations, and the other one is you're looking at conformance to a management system. So these two designations were initially established by the Auditing Association of Canada, but about 15, 20 years ago, we found that it was very hard with our voluntary organization to maintain the administration for these certifications. So we looked at a number of companies and decided ECHO had the best program in place at the time with the EP designation. So we handed over the EP designation administration to ECHO Canada. But AAC still remains to be the group that is in charge of the body of skills and knowledge for what auditors require. We also look at changing the exam questions and helping ECHO Canada with any administrative issues related to if the person who is applying for a certified auditor designation actually meets their criteria. So those are for environmental certifications in Canada. For health and safety certifications, the Auditing Association of Canada has developed the Certified Health and Safety Management System Auditor certification. So again, this is somebody who has some experience in auditing, some training, and the designation allows you to do management system audits from the health and safety side. It's also recognized in the CORE program as a prerequisite to become a CORE auditor, for example, in Alberta. Typically, if you want to become a certified auditor, it's a number of steps you have to go through. One, typically there'd be some post-secondary education. You'd have some work experience, 3 to 5 years in the industry that you're going to be auditing. You have to complete some audits before you can become a certified auditor as a test. And then you can also use some other designations. For example, RCHS MSA designation recognizes if you're a Canadian registered safety professional in the application process. So there's some hoops you don't have to jump through if you already are a CRSP. But again, once you get through it, it's not the end of the road. There are professional development requirements. So for example, we require 75 hours over 5 years of professional development experience, completing at least 10 audits over 50 audit days over a 5-year period to maintain your certification. So once you get certified, again, not the end of the road. In the US, unless they start tariffing environmental auditors. You can be certified in the U.S. There are a number of organizations. The Bureau of EHS Credentialing, they offer a certified professional environmental auditor designation, and they're also in charge of credentialing some people may know, the Certified Industrial Hygienist, the CIH in the U.S. They are not a member services group. They are basically an accreditation group. And the member services, for example, for the Certified Industrial Hygienist is the AIHA. So they provide the training and the benefits to the industrial hygienists, but they don't offer the certification. There's also a couple other groups in the U.S. Again, the U.S. is a lot bigger than Canada, so there are more competition on people who are offering credentials in the U.S. Again, I am not promoting any one of these, but there are certified auditor groups in the U.S. you can be part of. As I mentioned earlier, the core audit, the certificate of recognition, you don't have to be a CEA or an EMSLA. It certainly helps, but these agencies, these groups, train and accredit people to become auditors within their association. So again, I'm a core auditor in BC for Safety Driven, the Trucking Safety Council of British Columbia, also a core auditor for the Manufacturer Safety Alliance of BC. But there are a number of core programs in Alberta where people have been certified as a core auditor. Green Marine certification, if you're not familiar with that, it's an international certification for ship owners, shipbuilders, marine terminals, and ports and seaways. It's an environmental management system designation where there's a number of performance indicators and companies can be assessed against those performance indicators and get reach levels 1 to 5, 5 being the highest level for that particular indicator, and then they can say that they have a environmental management system in place that meets the Green Marine criteria. What are some of the benefits of being an auditor? Well, you get to work with various organizations trying to help them solve problems. So you're part of the solution, not part of the problem. You can share wealth. You could see good practices at one facility and bring those practices over as an opportunity for another facility. So that's always a great thing that people like to see. You can ensure compliance and performance at a reasonable price. So I've talked to a few lawyers, and they are at, I don't know, $600–700 an hour, which is probably not reasonable to hire them for 7 days to do an audit at your facility. So that's why I think the profession of environmental health and safety auditing came in, because it offers some reassurance at a reasonable price that a company is in compliance or conformance with rules. You also travel on someone else's dime. So as Jag said, we went to Macedonia a couple times. I've been to South Africa, and oftentimes the client pays for the flight and the meals, and I was on the road for about 5 years and was able to save enough money to buy a house when I got done. So yeah, it's good to travel on someone else's dime. And you see a lot of operations and you meet a lot of interesting people. So that's kind of some of the benefits of being an auditor. What are some of the opportunities that there are out there? How do you find out where the audits are taking place? Well, you can look on public bidding sites. Oftentimes there'll be requests for proposals or a statement of work that you can submit your quote to. You can check out various organizations that offer auditing certificates and see what their criteria are. You can be part of your own internal organization's audit program. So again, if your organization has a core audit designation, you can become an internal auditor for that, or team up with someone who is doing audits and shadow them as an auditor. So those are some of the opportunities that you can see are out there. And go on LinkedIn. There's lots of opportunities as environmental health and safety specialists or even auditors. They come up on LinkedIn when I see that once in a while. So that's really the auditor perspective. So there are, again, auditor certifications out there, and it's lots of fun to go out and see stuff and meet new people and try to help them. So thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Jag. I forgot to mention when I introduced Jag, he also took home the Eco Impact Auditor of the Year award in 2023. So opportunities for auditing. I've worked for a large company that has an EHS audit program, well, actually an operational audit program. And if you're in a company that does that, I've reached out to a lot of people in the organization, brought them into my audit team, given them audit training, and they have an opportunity to audit and see other parts of the organization. Like they've done all their work in one plant, now they can go audit in another plant. And the dynamic that you get going between the auditors from one plant and who they're auditing at another plant is really something to see, and you can really encourage sharing of information through the audit program as well, and creating opportunities to see other parts of an organization that you wouldn't otherwise see. So auditing gets you into a lot of places. Just checking the time here, and I want to make sure we've got lots of time for questions. We had a few questions that we talked about, but I think maybe what I'll do is just skip to opening it up to the audience. We've got a good big group of people here, and hopefully you've been thinking about some things you'd like to ask our panelists here. So why don't we do that? Open it up to the audience, and if you all stay silent, and I hope you don't, then I'll jump in with some other questions. But who's got some questions I'd like to put to Michael and Jag? Let's start right up here. There's a mic coming to you if you don't mind using that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm with the City of Calgary. I was really interested when you were talking about the due diligence audits and thinking about how do you prepare for that? Because now you're talking about looking in the future, like what are your sources of information? How do you go about preparing for one of those kind of audits?
Sorry. Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. So I worked on one recently. It's kind of an interesting one. It was in Mexico, and it was for a pipeline, and the client was a Casa Popular, a credit union in Quebec that was investing. They do investments in international investments as part of their program, and anyway, they were looking to invest in this pipeline. We audited it. So the audit was against international guidelines. So we looked at basically World Bank guidelines. We were looking at both environmental and social guidelines. We had a bit of a framework to follow. It was a lot of questions and asking a lot of questions in a lot of interviews. And so we basically went through the process where we identified what were the big hot button issues and what were less important issues. And then the next step would be to actually do the actual interviews or observations down in on-site in country. Unfortunately, we never got there because they canceled the project, so I didn't get to participate in it. But I've worked on other ones in Canada a while earlier, and a lot of that involves it's guessing. It's really guessing. So what you do is, like, for example, let's say you go to a mine site. You'd walk through the facility. You'd go through and you'd say, okay, like those liability, like there's cleanup here. You'd go through, you look through the reports. You'd say, okay, there's a site here that needs to be cleaned up. And then what you do is you just identify that, go back, talk to your experts, usually a colleague of yours who deals with site assessment or, in a site assessment or a remediation specialist, and say, if we were to clean up this, what would it cost? And get a ballpark figure. And usually the figures that you would provide in a report like that are ballpark numbers. So you wouldn't say, like, it's going to cost you $50 million. You'd probably say it's going to cost you somewhere between, I don't know, whatever, 5 and, 125 million. So you put a very big ballpark on that. So does that answer your question, Jen?
A little bit, so that makes sense when you're looking at liabilities. I was thinking more of, like with the ISO standard, and we're looking at emerging trends and issues, new pieces of legislation. Part of the due diligence sound like we're talking about being prepared for those future trends and organizational sustainability, and what kind of diligence are they doing in their practices to prepare for that? Like, I just wasn't sure kind of.
You define it in like a high, medium, low, right, risk. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to a price tag. That's usually what the due diligence audits are usually requested by investors. So, and what they want to do is understand if they were to purchase this facility, what's it going to cost them? So they want it usually comes back to a price tag. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Michael, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, typically, I've been involved in some merger and acquisition audits. So we look at some of the liabilities that the company has got itself into. And so I did one for a railroad. So we actually went down into their war room and their records room and went through all the paperwork on when they've had spills, for example. And we, tried to understand, as Jag said, is remediation going to be, $50,000 or $50 million? What's the ballpark? So yeah, getting the scope and looking at the liabilities associated with that typically is how we were getting involved with the merger and acquisition side.
Thanks. Who else? Why don't we go right to the back there? I'll get to you next.
Hello, Jovan. Quick question on the environmental training. So a lot of designations have like a yearly amount of training you got to do. So isn't for like an up-and-coming auditor, are there specific training courses that you recommend, organizations, any kind of resources would be appreciated? Like I said, any specific courses? Is it going to be maybe postgraduate degrees? Is it whatever your recommendation is? Or institutions or whatever?
Yeah, well, in the old days...
It's on.
In the old days, there was an organization called Jakes Whitford, which was a consulting firm, and they offered environmental auditing courses. Jag and I both taught those. The Auditing Association of Canada occasionally will have a audit course that we put on. There are other organizations, BSI, for example. They're a fairly recognized training provider for management system audits. There are some university courses that I wouldn't say necessarily are structured like the whole degree is auditing, but as part of an environmental management degree or a sustainability degree, there will be a module on audits, and that's where you can get some training as well. Core audit groups, if you're a health and safety auditor, the core audit program requires you to take a 5-day training course. And so the partner groups in, well, I'm familiar with the ones in BC, but I'm sure in Alberta here as well, they have opportunities for people who want to become a core auditor to take that training. And so they offer that as well.
Yeah, I know that both the U of A and U of C have environmental auditing courses in their extension department as part of their environmental certificate taught by a colleague of ours, Kevin Dunn. I think he's still teaching those courses, but he's taught them for a few years as well at both U of A and U of C. Okay, over here. Yes.
Thank you so much. Anyway, so I have a question. Maybe you mentioned, and I didn't get it. When it comes to getting certified to be an auditor in Canada, we can do through EcoCanada, right? But my question is whether it is recognized only in Canada or is it recognizable all around the globe? That is my first question. And second is, if we would like to aim to be an international auditor, what basically needs to get done? I don't know. That's my question. Thank you.
You hit an interesting point. Michael, you want to start on that one?
Well, I think it's about brand recognition. Yes, in Canada, EcoCanada, as far as I know, is the only organization right now certifying environmental auditors. So what we're trying to promote with the Auditing Association of Canada and Echo Canada trying to promote that when companies are putting out jobs to do audits, that they add in the qualifications of the people who are going to be bidding on the work, that they have these CEA or EMSLA designations. I have seen some proposals or some RFPs, requests for proposals, which say that you have to be a professional engineer, a PEng or a PGO in order to do the audit. I would say that typically is not a very good assurance that you're getting someone who knows about auditing. But it does say that they've gone through some sort of organization that has a president, a board of directors, an ethics policy, a discipline policy if you're caught doing something wrong. So yeah, so it's really about brand recognition. Echo Canada has taken the certifications, and it is being more widely asked for in requests in Canada. Can I go to the US and say I'm a certified auditor in Canada and, can I do work in the US? Absolutely. Similar to certified industrial hygienists in the US. I mean, they are recognized up in Canada as having, industrial hygiene certifications and skills. So, and there are international designations. I looked at one as well. I have a friend who got this designation. It's called the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. They're based in England, and they offer a certificate in environmental management, which is a sort of a recognized international designation. But here in Canada, Echo Canada is pretty much the only game in town to certify environmental auditors.
Yeah, also on the international question, I used to belong to an organization called the Auditing Roundtable, which got absorbed by the Institute of Internal Auditors, which tends to be more focused on the financial side of auditing. But they took over the Auditing Roundtable, which had certifications through, this is in the US, certifications through BAC, the Bureau of Environmental Auditor Certifications. And then they absorbed that certification into the IIA. So the IIA has expanded that. And at one point, we were trying to get a mutual understanding letter between Auditing Association of Canada and IIA, but it just never materialized. So it's not formal, but generally, if you've got one of those certifications, it will be recognized in the other country. Yes, over here in the blue shirt.
Just a question. So are there specific auditing designations from other countries where like they have the skill set to do the job in Canada, but it's not recognized, where you would see an opportunity for like an educational institution to kind of like ramp up or like cross-train into a Canadian recognized designation? Like, is that a problem from international markets?
It hasn't been for me. I mean, I think as long as you are accredited through a professional association, again, that has a board of directors, that has regular meetings, then that bodes well in showing that you know what you're doing. The profession of auditing is the same in the US as it is in Canada. I mean, you're following the three main steps: the pre-audit, the audit, and then the reporting. And then ISO is an international designation. So yeah, so if you're a EMSLA here in Canada, that does show that you have environmental management system experience and you can do ISO 14001 audits. So yeah, so there is some, and again, it's branding, it's recognition, it's getting out there and making sure that companies that are asking for audits ask for proper credentials of the people who are doing the audits.
Okay, but there's no like specific, I guess, laws that are like, we require this specific organization's accreditation, or?
There's no laws, but we are seeing more and more the government, for example, Government of Canada, provinces, when they're putting out RFPs, cities, when they're putting out the RFPs, they are saying you need to have EP designation, or equivalent.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let's come up here.
Given the theme of innovation and technology for the event this year, can you talk a little bit about what opportunities and trends you're seeing in the auditing world with innovation and technology?
You want to hit on AI a little bit, Jag? We were chatting about that before.
We talked about this earlier.
Yeah, it's a topic. We were chatting over dinner about this, and then we were talking about it earlier today. We were just talking about AI and saying, how do you use AI, and do you use AI in audits? And we were talking with someone last night who's not here, and he was saying, oh, he is. We were talking about the importance of having a person and not a machine. You know, you can't just punch information into a machine. But I was saying it is a good tool. So for example, I recently did an audit. I know intuitively, I've done enough audits that I saw things like waste that was not, for example, oily rags that are not covered. You know, we know that's a compliance issue. You know, waste manifests, having them up to date, having the numbers tracked, all that kind of stuff. So you know intuitively when you're doing an audit, sort of, if you've done enough of them, what the issue is, but you don't know what the actual regulatory finding is. And that's the beauty of AI, is you can just say, can you tell me which regulation in Ontario applies to, and boom. As opposed to going through, what did we do before 5 years ago? We went into Google. We got a whole bunch of ads, got frustrated, and then you ended up looking at an old audit report and you found it, right? Now you just put it into AI and it spits it right out and it tells you, you know, it's the Ontario regulation for blah, 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 blah. And then you pull that up and you look at it. So again, the machines haven't replaced people, but it's definitely aided and making things a lot easier. So that's a perfect example where I've used AI in audits.
But there's limitations as well. So again, an audit is observations, right? So AI won't tell you if the worker's working safely or whether the waste is contained properly. That's something that the auditor has to have knowledge of. And again, as we heard earlier, I mean, the whole human interface is very important in auditing. And AI can support that by developing potential like an audit checklist or protocol for you, but it's not going to get you sort of that human face-to-face conversation that you need to collect audit evidence.